Hello and welcome to the podcast where we explore the world of audio storytelling, where people who are responsible for creating enchanted experiences discuss the difficulties of making them. I'm Oscar, he, him pronouns, and I'm on a podquest to learn everything you wanted to know about audio drama and actual plays, but never dared to ask. And today I am delighted to be joined by Adam. Adam, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hello, my name is ADAM QUTAISHAT. I am an audio storyteller and theatrical actor. I use any and all pronouns shuffled. And I am primarily known for my work on the podcast Vigil.
Absolutely. And so let's go a little bit into sort of past. So I like to start things off by just kind of exploring where you came from. Because if I remember correctly, you came from a sort of a teaching background. What was
Yes.
kind of, was teaching a kind of a way to kind of pay the paycheck whilst you're doing auditions, or was it the thing you start? What was your kind of kickoff here?
Sure. So my schooling was music. So I went to school for music education, and that was all I ever wanted to do was just be a music teacher. Unfortunately, whilst my career was beginning as a music teacher, I ran into some resistance from a let's say bullying administrator, and so that career was sort of taken away from me.
Yeah, a tale as old as time, sadly.
Truly. And but what sort of became of that was I left mid-year in the midst of some things and took like a corporate job just to like pay my bills, do whatever I needed to do. And suddenly I started getting asked to act in theatrical productions. I had people, being like, "Oh, would you come be in this play? Would you come?" And I was auditioning for some things here and there. And all of a sudden, they started to pay a little bit, and I was like, "Oh, could I?
What, pay?
Could I do this?" And so I started doing that. And at the same time, one of the theaters that I worked with was I decided to help them with some podcast stuff because I have a while I was in school studying music, I also was working for the local campus radio station.
Right.
I worked in sports radio for years, so I'd done production. I had done things like that, like covering stories and running shows and all of that stuff. So I had the audio expertise, more or less, to be a little dangerous when it came to podcasting and things like that. So they brought me in, and I had this idea they wanted to do like a local what's going on in theater podcast. And I was like, it'd be cool if there were some audio plays. There were some things that like got people who like theater invested in what we're doing. And so we did that. The first show we ever did was called Podcast and Crew. It was short-lived.
Yep.
We did, I think, 4 or 5 episodes of it, and then immediately pivoted because the only thing that anybody really cared about on the show was the audio fiction stuff.
Nice.
And so as my theater career was developing, sort of at the same time, my audio fiction career was tied to it in a way. So that was sort of my winding road from being an educator to acting in audio fiction.
But it sounds like performance is a key part of something inside you, which I think a lot of the people, those of us, I mean, I'm your Amdram. I've never had any desire or interest or skill to ever want to be a proper actor, even voice actor. I've been more focused on the making of games because my heart bleeds games, and that's my background. So you've gone into sort of, again, I'm just going to ask a little bit about the sports one, because I think so far that's kind of the one that I find that in an interesting way different from some people, because you don't normally see people from the sort of theatre kind of perspective or the games perspective also having the sport head. Is that unusual for you, or do you think that actually I'm just being classically kind of like blinkered on my observation, my biases?
I think your observation is correct. I think there's not often a lot of bleed over in those two things. And I actually think that that's a little sad, because what's really interesting to me is that, in my view, the sports world, the theatrical world, the games world, the entertainment world is all one thing. It's all things that, like, in my brain, the way I think of it is like, if you are doing something like scientific or mathematical or whatever, that is for the intellectual part of your brain, that is for the logical part of your brain. If you're doing something for your soul, if you're doing something for your heart, if you're doing something, I think that's the entertainment world, that's storytelling.
Yeah.
And whether that storytelling is sort of really aleatoric and based on athleticism, or whether it's very intellectual and based on like gameplay, or whether it's very just storytelling focused and
Or
it's all
expression. Yeah.
right, yeah, feeling, movement, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They're all scratching that itch for somebody somewhere. And so for me,
But
like, sorry, one of the things
no, go for it.
one of the things that I was really interested in when I was doing sports was the thing that kind of got me into it was literally the storytelling aspect. So I played sports growing up. I've coached sports. I've refereed sports. I've done a lot of those things as a kid. And then as an adult, the thing that really fascinated me was the storytelling aspect of it. And so what I got into at first was the play-by-play announcing. I was the person that was not only translating what was happening in front of me into to people that couldn't see it, so that I was explaining to them what was happening, but I was also doing it in a way that was conveying some sort of narrative to them. And
Absolutely.
and then you know, transitioning into having a sports talk radio show, and like, how am I entertaining people? How are we telling a story? How are we making this cohesive? How are we conveying this in a journalistic sense? And that led into like more of the documentary side of that show and things like that. So I think, you know, that lens is really interesting to me. And in fact, I have three episodes in the can of a sports of a sports show that I haven't released because we haven't been able to. I have about 15 episodes written and we haven't been able to record them because my actors are scattered around the country and I figured that out. But it is, I think that there is something. I think it's interesting that like a lot of people will think like, oh, sport and doing, you know, theater or music or any of those things are very different. And to me, they're just different sides of the same coin.
No, and I love that you said that. And that's kind of where I was hoping you'd go with it. The one aspect I think is really interesting, looking at it from an esports point of view, because obviously that's a bit more close to home to my neck of the woods. One of the things that I think about in game design is, have I built enough space in the play experience so that an observer, commentator has time to speculate, and then when the payoff happens, to be able to celebrate it, and then after that payoff, have time to be able to explain it. And I think one of the things that makes a really good esport, and I think it's the same thing that makes a difference between a soccer or a I'm going to use the word soccer because I'm British. I should say football, but if I say football, you'll have a different. But even your football, American, Australian football, they're Australian footy, I should say. They all have these traits of these moments of build-up, these moments of impact, these moments of crescendo. What is that if that is not a storytelling arc? And so I think there's more overlap than maybe we give credit. And I think if we dissect that, I think that the question is, what is the mechanism that we can let an audience feel that joy in the different genres? But that's another subject for another time. Okay, so you've done this sort of sports podcast. You've evolved that. You've now entering the world of theatre. It sounds like you've already been thinking about a whole bunch of different podcasts for different styles. And you're going to kick off Vigil. What's the process that got you to kick off building Vigil?
So we had been doing sort of a variety podcast show for years. It was called WAIP, which then led to the most successful piece of that was called The All Arcadians. It got signed to a podcast network that eventually fizzled out. So unfortunately, that show didn't get to continue. But so I'd been doing podcasts for 4 or 5 years at this point, and they all sort of ended abruptly in like end of 2019, beginning of 2020. And then, of course,
that's an interesting time.
Yeah, what a time for all of my podcast endeavors to abruptly end.
Yeah,
and so we get to sort of. I wanted to say like, I started working on this sport one that I was talking about. I started slowly like the idea for that was percolating, and I had started like recording little bits and pieces and writing little bits and pieces. And then we get to like the fall of 2020, and my brain was just like, well, I don't know if I'll ever work again. And more importantly, I don't know if my friends will ever work again. And I was like, I can't, I'd been holding on. The world of Vigil has always sort of existed in my head since I was like a teenager. And I just was like, always like, oh, I don't know what the right medium or what the right time or what the right story or any of those things. And so I eventually was just like, I decided that there was a piece of advice that I got 15 years ago from someone, and it was about music actually. But they said that never save a good idea for fear that you won't have another one. And that was just
Yeah.
like bouncing around in my brain. I was like, my friends will never work again. I'll never work again. It's just time. And so, and also at the same time, I've told this story before, but I think it's quite funny. I was watching, because my friends decided that they were all obsessed with it. I decided to join them in watching JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and I hated it. I hated it. I really did.
Yeah.
It was too aggressive. It was too memey. It was too like misogynist and racist and all of those things. Like I get why people like
Yeah.
it, but it is just not for me. But the concept behind it, which is that like, okay, these people have superpowers, but they don't ever get more powerful. They just have to solve puzzles with them, was really interesting. I just hated everything around it. And so I was like, you know what? I bet I could do something with that. So those pieces all sort of came together in like the fall of 2020 in my brain, and I had space and time. And so I just started getting my friends together and generating ideas and writing these stories down. And we recorded the whole season. I had no idea, because my other podcasts had been like somewhat locally successful, but like not globally successful. And so but I had worked on a podcast called The Wanderer for a Fable and Folly, and so I had Sean Howard's email, and so I finished the season and I just sent it to him, and I was like, "Do you want this?" And we started releasing, not hearing anything. And a couple weeks into our release, Sean emailed me back and was like, "We'd love to have you on Fable and Folly." And so then started submitting to festivals, starting getting on lists and things like that, and it started. You know, the snowball started rolling down the hill. So, but that was sort of the journey to Vigil. Was the inspiration, the inspiring factor was like, the world's on fire. I guess now's the time.
Whilst you're here, don't forget to check out our actual play, The Anything Could Happen show, on YouTube and all good podcast sites, where I put my guest players through no-win scenarios with limited information and always against the clock. And of course, where anything could happen.
I definitely want to check out for the salvage. I want to check out the cargo bay. Do we have to stay all together, or can I go do my job?
Yes, please do your job. Stay on comms, is all I said. It's all right,
Great,
Dad.
you got it. I'm off.
Yeah, you're nervous, but don't worry. We keep tab on each other. I definitely keep tab on all of you, of course. As
Let's. I think the initial scan indicated that the cargo bay is sealed. Let's not unseal anything when we're separated.
You talk about kind of superheroes and the kind of like I kind of because I grew up in the kind of 80s as a kid. I was I was really into the sort of darker comics, and obviously Watchmen, and that's when Watchmen was new. There were other V for Vendetta, that kind of stuff, but there's also other stuff like New Statesman, which you won't know of because it was, I think, only a UK based I might be wrong, but they were so dark, and I loved that darkness. But it's interesting kind of to see that your influence came from watching something you didn't like and wanted to do differently. So, I mean, you kind of said it, but the superhero thing, in the current context where we've had Marvel taking over and dominating the space, is that a help or a hindrance to, reaching your audience?
It's really interesting because, like, I think it serves as both. And I think, like, we are uniquely positioned to be helped by it in a way. And I think that's purely, like, I think happenstance, and also, like, I don't know. I like to think it speaks to the quality of the work. But so it's tricky because, you have your Marvel, your DC, and like maybe your Dark Horse, and sometimes Image, and nobody else thinks about anything else. And even in that, like, the lens is, if it's not something that is like mainstream in Marvel or DC now, people are not aware of it, or, for the kids that grew up in the 90s, if it's not like, if it wasn't. And so, like, for me, like, my big, like, defining influences were obscure comics that I read growing up. I'm a big fan of, like, The Question from, like, the 80s and 90s, and I'm and things like Astro City and stuff like that, where it's like these are the comic books that, like, the nerds read, but like the mainstream audience doesn't necessarily have that same familiarity with. Or like one of the big pieces that was an influence for like how the character of Vigil developed was Barbara Gordon as the Oracle, or as Oracle.
Yes,
And
yeah.
modern Batman fans who have only grown up on the films have no idea that's a thing. And so
exactly.
You know, I have to say like, oh, Felicity Smoke from Arrow, and they're like, oh, okay, great.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
but
nothing. I mean, I thought that was it was good series at the time. They did it, I think, as good a job as you could hope to make that stuff accessible.
Totally. And but I think that like because Marvel and to a lesser extent DC have this sort of powerful hold over modern mainstream audiences, and they also make podcasts. That it can be when folks look for superhero podcasts and they see that there's an officially licensed Wolverine podcast, they'll go there. But on the other side of that coin, it has, I think, in my opinion, I don't think there's a ton of superhero audio fiction out there by indie creators that I have. Like, there's a large amount of it, but like compared to like the true crime stuff, compared to some of like the fantasy stuff or the D&D inspired and that kind of stuff, it's really sort of a small percentage of the marketplace. And I would also say that like Vigil lives in a place that like is slightly different than what other people are doing, in the same way that like the Bright Sessions and Inhale are like different versions of it. And I think that like one of the cool things that has happened that I've noticed is that I think that what we have done has gained popularity enough or been quality enough that people like it enough that when people are like, oh, I just listened to the Wolverine podcast, are there any other superhero ones that I should know about? That things like the Bright Sessions and SPR and Vigil are mentioned right away. And so that has led that mainstream audience to discover something that is indie created and indie produced. And I think that that's a really cool place that the podcast and audio fiction world likes to live in, that I would say like the film industry and things like that doesn't necessarily have that same level of crossover. And even comic books, I think that like in the audio fiction world, because of the audience and the creatives that do that, you know, a lot of those shows were produced by Lauren Shippen, who like, you know, is an indie creator herself. And so like there's this cool sort of crossover environment where that like the mainstream success is of course going to draw a lot of those listeners, but there's, I think, more opportunity for those listeners to find independently created stuff, just because of the way that audio fiction lives in the landscape of creatives.
Yeah, completely. So let's I mean, how much of that were you thinking about back in 2020 though, when you were kind of planning that? I presume very little. It was just, this is a thing I have to do now. So how did you get from this is the thing I have to do, to having something? What were the steps involved in that process?
Totally. I mean, the thing that, like, there were some key pieces in my mind when I set about creating it. Not only in 2020 was you know, a global pandemic and lockdown and quarantine happening, but at the same time in the U.S., there was this great racial reckoning in the wake of the murder of George Floyd and the We See You White American Theater and a lot of these things happening. And as a BIPOC creator, a creator of color, I wanted to make sure that my fellow colleagues who were involved in that movement, because one of the things that we noticed is the more we spoke up, the less auditions we got. And so
that just breaks my heart. I mean, I understand it's real, but it just anyway, sorry.
And so I was thinking about like, who are the people that like I've seen at auditions that I've always admired, or the people that that have been my like constant collaborators that have always worked with me. And one of the things I decided was, I was like, I think we can tell a superhero story. I think we can do all these things just in this community. And so I just sought out folks and I asked them, and I said, and then one of the things that I really like to do when I write and when I create with people is I'll sit actors down. Every actor that works on one of my shows in the style that Vigil is created will always get a contributing writer credit, because I will sit down with them and I will say, what do you want to play? What interests you? What is something you've never gotten the chance to show people you can do? Or what is something that you do really well that you want to show off? And then we talk about like what storylines interest you, what are your hopes and dreams for this character, what are these things, and they, I mean, that's the thing. Actors, storytellers, everyone, they have stories living inside them. They have ideas. They have creative. Like some of these superpowers, some of these ideas, some of these things that are integral to what the show is now weren't created by me. They were created by my collaborators, and then my job is to then hammer that into the shape of this story. And I have this plot of the overarching story in my head, and I've had that all along.
Yeah.
And so, but like how I get there is very malleable, and I have a great deal of fun creating that with them.
So you've got me thinking, because I'm trying to piece in my head to what degree we're talking about a scripted piece to a kind of fully devised piece. It sounds like you're drifting, but I'm not quite sure I've got in my head quite where on that spectrum we're talking.
Sure. I think the easiest way to clarify that is to tell you the full process. So
Do it.
So from initially, I will contract all of my actors for, usually we go in arcs. So 2 episode arcs. We just did our very first 3 episode arc. And so what I'll do is I'll get them together into a video chat or in person if we can do it. And I will just be like, what do you want to play with? What are the ideas? What do you do? What do you want to do with this? And then I take all of those ideas, I talk through them with my plot beats and explore. This is the goal of what we're doing. This is the story, whatever it is. They all agree to that. I go away and I hammer out scripts. And then I come back to them. We read those scripts. They give me feedback. I go away. I rewrite the scripts. We come back. And then when we record, those scripts are guidelines. So some actors, they're like, okay, I need to read every word on the page. And that's okay. But for, I want to make sure that every actor has what they need. But many of the actors in the show are able to just like glance down and be like, this is the plot point I have to hit here, and say it in their own words. And to me, that's one of the things that helps Vigil feel sort of more in that found footage world where
more
it's
energetic,
like, more energetic and also just like humanly natural. One of the things, even the actors who are reading off the script, one of the things I'm constantly like being is like, you know the words too well. Can you find them? Can they be spontaneous for you? You and repeat stuff. Do all those simple things that, when you're reading a script, you often forget to do. And so like forcing people, and it's like so easy to just do another take if you like, oh, I need that plot point there. Great, we'll just do that again. But the spontaneity of it, and it's one of those things that like when I'm reading the script and I'm doing it, like I'm just sort of glancing down, making sure I know what plot points are in my next line, and then I'm just saying it how I feel it in that moment, so that it lives in this place of like, yes, it is a scripted series. Yes, we do all of these. I do all of this work to like write out exactly what's going to happen. But the language that we use, a lot of that is spontaneous and improvised in the moment.
But so it sounds like you've got this kind of scripted but naturalistic process for the production. That's in the context of a short arc, 2 episodes generally. But then that you've got an overarching arc of where the story is going, which you're framing each of those incidents with. Does that make sense?
Yes, that's right. And so like in my mind, I have a 5-season arc for Vigil. Currently, I only am sure that we're doing 2 seasons, so we'll see what happens. But I have 5 seasons of the show in my mind. And
I immediately go to Babylon 5 when someone says 5-season arc. Sorry. Very silly of me.
Totally. But there's like, and like, I know, like certain things, like, is Vigil dead or alive? Like, who is the person doing these things? Like, who is, like, those big things, I know. In my mind, I have an answer to those things. I'll never tell anyone, but I know those things, right? Yeah. And but there are some things I just had, for instance, had a new actor come in. We had a character that was going to be just like off screen, like never heard. We decided in the writing of an arc, we wanted them to be a part of it. I hired an actor to do it. And in talking with this actor about their character and all these things, we had some interesting discussions that sort of allowed me to like be like, oh, actually, this big plot point that I wanted to hit with this character, because we're 4 seasons out from it, I can move it, and now it's this character's thing, right? So there's a lot that can be changed and adjusted, but like the overarching big beats of the story I already know the answers to, and so that allows me to hit all these smaller beats inside of it. And one of the things I'll tell the actors, I'm like, all right, we have 3 episodes. These are the important things in this season that we have to get in. Do any of those inspire anything in what you're thinking? So that we're sort of giving them prompts to sort of help them. And my performers are great about being like, oh, actually that like lines up with this thing that I was thinking about, and vice versa. They'll say something, I'll be like, actually that connects to this. Can we bring those pieces together? So it's a bit of a puzzle, but it's a really fun and exciting one.
Yeah, and I mean, even when I've done sort of, I mean, I'm an amateur writer, but I mean, when I've done those moments where you get the character does something you didn't expect them to do, and you didn't think you did that consciously, it sounds like that's magnified, because not only will the plot evolve, but the actors playing the plot evolve the way they're doing it, and presumably that evolves the way you're thinking about your arc anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is this beautiful, like, synergistic energy of, like, every time I have a writing meeting with the other performers, I come away with it so excited, because I'm like, oh, great. I could never have come up with these ideas on my own. But because I have all of these pieces of inspiration, I'm so thrilled about now the possibilities for this plot that like, again, I sort of knew vaguely what was going to happen, but now all of these details have become clear, and there's all these fun little tricks I can use. Like, I think like anytime like you're writing a thriller or anything like that, or like I grew up writing comedy. Like the All Arcadians was our biggest podcast before this, and that show was very much like in the fantasy genre, but it was like very comedic, witty, almost sitcom-y at times. And I think the same thing, and SWH was a spy comedy, and some of those shows, it was like, when I was writing it and I was collaborating and I was putting together all the pieces, when I would be inspired by something, it would when things came together by those inspiration, that's when the magic happens. That's when you discover like, oh, actually I've written this thing that does this, when I actually thought I thought it did this. And I think you're right. Magnified is an incredible word for it, because when I'm working with all of these brilliant storytellers, you know, something simple that they can just say in passing can unlock the thing that I needed to like bring together. And so like I'm still riding high on. I just wrote a 3-episode arc with a group of performers, and the things that we discovered and the way that like I have been able to find some, I think, thriller magic in these episodes, and the way that I've been able to create mystery around what they want to play with. And some of it, I can't talk too much about it, because it's not there yet.
No spoilers.
But it's but it is like simple things, like one actor being like, I never get allowed to play comedy. And in a show like Vigil, where like we don't lean into comedy per se, but I was like, great, how can I take comedy and then turn it into something that like lives in a thriller world? Allowed me to write a character that I think is going to be one of the most interesting ones that fans experience listening to the show.
I forgot what the line is. It's something like comedy plus failure equals tragedy or something, isn't it? I can't remember. Some line like that.
Yeah. I think one of the things I love doing is taking, and this is something that, it's not unique to me, but I love taking things that are like bits that are funny, that are silly, that are whatever it is, and turning it into something heartbreaking. And I know that's mean of me. Like, I know that's not a good trait, but like, I just think about things like, I remember watching Red versus Blue, and the Machinima series that was made by Rooster Teeth. And, and I remember watching that and it being so silly and irreverent and like downright offensive for the first 5 seasons or whatever that was.
Oh, at least.
That early YouTube time. And then you get to like seasons 9 and 10 or even season 6, and they're explaining these ridiculous things that they did, but they're explaining it in a way that'll break your heart. Yeah. And that to me was like a really crystallizing moment of like, oh, everything can be explained, and everything can be explained in a way that can give you emotional impact for an audience. And it's so interesting to me because, seasons 9 and 10 of Red versus Blue are actually like some of the most interesting pieces of art that I've seen. And I know that not many people would say that about a Machinima series, but I think that like there's so many different like ways, and as somebody who like grew up doing classical music and now I do like professional theater, it is I oftentimes reflect on like how weird, eclectic, and not pretentious my taste in storytelling is. And I think it's one of the things that like has allowed me to like, there's stories in everything. And I'm so excited to learn from all of those stories. And I think that's what we're getting at here, is that like, then when I get to collaborate with people, I can tap into their way of storytelling and find new ways to tell my story, or the story that like sort of I'm the incubator of.
Yeah, no, totally. And actually, that's a perfect example of what the correct quote I've just discovered was: comedy plus time equals tragedy. And what you described with Red vs. Blue is exactly that. But I'm going to take just one. But I want to get to like the getting the thing ready to release and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But I can't help myself, because I think there's an interesting parallel with what you're describing and what I see in actual plays. And when I write something for, storytelling purposes, there's something about the control I have as the controller of the universe of that thing. When I'm running a D&D type game for friends, again, similar arc, but what you're getting in that process is response, feedback, dynamism, which the adventure happens because of what the players do, not because of what I do. I'm just controlling direction. But when you get into some of the stuff that some of these games are doing, where you're literally, it's the players that are creating the story collaboratively, dynamically. I think it's a really interesting difference in the way that we tell stories and the effectiveness of different storytelling techniques that apply to different forms of this genre, this audio storytelling space.
Totally. And I've done a few, I ran an actual play related to the All Arcadians for several episodes. And I've been guested on several actual play podcasts. I've run D&D campaigns for friends and played them. And I'm a big lover of the tabletop and role-playing space. And to me, and I know not everyone feels this way, and that's fine, but to me, when I'm playing any of those games, that is an experience in communal storytelling. Whether I'm the person running the game or whether I'm the person playing a character in the game, I'm not interested in telling my story by itself. I'm interested in seeing how my story becomes part of a communal story. And while that's that's not necessarily scripted in many ways, maybe there's a shape by the person running the game, or maybe there isn't. That to me is always the most interesting thing, and I think that there's a huge parallel to how I create Vigil, and how I've created other shows, and how those actual play spaces work. And I think that like the most compelling actual plays, the actual plays that we love listening to, that we love the stories of, that we love all of those things. And it's also funny for me because it's like, I'm always really fascinated when actual plays start deteriorating. Like when there's shows where it's like, oh, this season one isn't as good as last season, or the fans are backlashing, or whatever it is. And I think as a storyteller who's done a lot of these things and has sort of the glimpse behind the curtain, I actually like to look at it and be like, actually, and I'm never going to say this in an online forum, but like, I'll look at a show where fans are angry about the current season, or whether the creators are like, we don't know if this is worth it anymore, or whatever it is. And it's like, I'm looking at it and I'm actually able to diagnose a different thing than everyone else is seeing in a lot of cases, where it's like, you became concerned. In many cases, you became concerned about your story being correct.
Yeah. And
what actually you needed to be concerned about was your story being shared. Yeah. And when they all start, I talk about it in theater all the time. When you have an unclear vision for a show, I say all the dog sleds are pulling the dog sled in different directions, and all the dogs are pulling in different directions. And so now you have like 8 people in different plays trying to do the same play. And I feel the same time when I listen to actual plays where they're all really trying to please the audience in different ways. I find the same thing. It's really fascinating to me where it's like, oh, all the dogs are pulling the dog sled in different ways. And when actually what made them great in the first place was they were all just there having fun and telling a story. And
yes, absolutely.
but I also understand the pressure of an industry that's just like, it has to be good and everybody has to love it and you have to keep the fans happy and audience and content and all of those things. But
Yeah.
it always, it's
No
a
one's
little
saying it's
heartbreaking.
easy.
Yeah, no, certainly not. But it's always a little
No,
heartbreaking to me when I listen to those seasons of those actual plays, and I'm like, oh no, you've lost the joy, you've lost the fun, you've lost the heart of the story.
Yeah, and it's great when they get it back, but it's hard. So obviously, we could clearly talk about this part for about an hour, but I want to try and get a little bit to the sort of like the nuts and bolts of the process. You've got these recordings. Like I think you were saying you record remotely, or do you record in person in studio?
We try to record in person as much as possible.
Okay.
One of the things that I do is the great favor that I did myself is I try to use as much natural ambient sound and sound design and Foley as I can. So when we have our characters in this, because Vigil lives in two worlds, it lives in the past and then it lives in the present. And the characters that are living in the present are making the podcast that we're all listening to. So those are the actors that I will pull into my little home studio. I have like a closet that's set up and soundproofed, and I'll bring them over and have them record on the microphone I'm using now, just for clean audio and to make it sound like it could actually be something recorded in a podcast studio.
Yeah.
Everything else that exists in the past, I have a little Zoom field recorder, and I will go to locations and I will record at those locations to the best of my ability. Obviously, it's not always possible, but that has, I've found, and try, not all, some of my actors, like when I started the show, that we were all like somewhat local to one another, and then of course we've all now traveled across the country, largely due to our own success, which is a lovely thing. You know,
Nice.
I started out, I was living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and most everyone else was located in Wisconsin. And so we were doing the show, and suddenly, you know, one of our actors from our last arc in the first season, she got super successful, moved to New York. Another actor, super successful, moved to LA. I've also been very successful. I moved to Chicago. We all spread to like the major hubs, which is great for us. It's harder to record in person now. So what I will do is I'll mail people Zoom recorders and insure those packages, but we'll set them up and we'll try to set up the scene and perform the scene as if, you know, we have scripts in hand and all of those things, but we'll try to perform as many of the physical actions and things like that as we can. Yeah. One, to help ourselves as actors, but two, because then I get the sound of that thing. And when I have the sound of that thing, I'm able to enhance it or adapt it or whatever, but I don't have to like go in and build the scene to feel naturalistic. The scene was already naturalistic. I can just, you know, tease at it to help listeners understand what's going on.
I imagine the logistical challenge of that, particularly if you've got multiple characters in the same environment in the story, but they're not physically located in the same environment. I imagine that becomes quite a challenge to pull together.
It can be tricky. One of the things that we will do, it has been quite fun, is like we'll set up like almost like multiple shots at the same time, like you would in film. So like we will perform the scene. I may be, because Vigil is never on site in most cases, I'll be performing the scene in a different room with headphones in, listening to everyone else, because I also end up directing the show, because that's just the nature of the audio fiction in many cases. So I've got my Zoom recorder on. I'm recording it. I've got an earpiece in. I'm listening to the other actors who have, you know, they're all incredible creators and directors as well. So they're giving me feedback and all of those things. And so they're on location at a park somewhere doing a fight scene, and I'm talking them through it. And we're doing this thing, and we're all just recording simultaneously. And then I get to like listen to those takes later and be like, oh, this worked, or oh, this didn't work, and we adjust and we figure out accordingly. So it can be logistically challenging, but I also find it to be quite fun to like sort of set the whole scene and sort of live in it as best we can. And it's like, for me then, like the anxiety of like, oh, are they okay? Are they set? Like, how are they doing it? Like, is everything working out for them in this park that I can't physically see? I'm then able to bring that into the, you know, acting of the scene where, oh, okay, my character is anxious because they're in a superhero fight.
And because in context you're not there,
right.
Perfect.
So it makes it a little bit easier to act.
If you're enjoying this interview, why not check out this brief trailer from our guest?
Hello, my name is Alicia Wu, and Maria Kennedy is still missing. But we can now tell you that she is alive.
I tried to find her, but she was just gone.
I think we're making progress.
Returning her safe is priority number 1.
We haven't yet located her, so we're returning to what we know. Vigil.
Everything is here. We just need to know it somehow.
We're piecing together the clues.
I gave you the note, but I can't do any more for you.
Who is Morse? And how is he connected to Vigil?
I don't know if I can stop this.
We need your help before it's too late.
We're running out of time.
Time is already up. Coming soon. Season 2 of Vigil.
Vigil, a superhero audio fiction podcast. The search for Maria begins March 7th. Sign up now to join the search at vigilpod.com for early access and more.
And I will say this is also quite funny to me is that I never intended to play Vigil. The only reason I am the voice actor behind Vigil is because it was convenient because we were in a pandemic lockdown, and choosing to have multiple actors who weren't me in the leading roles was going to be logistically impossible. If I were making this show now, I would have cast anyone else.
Anyone else? Yeah, I get it. So, I mean, but this is a core difference between, say, an actual play and some types of audio story. And in fact, so obviously, I can perform. I can get people into my group and do my session in 2 hours. I've recorded 2 40-minute live, experiences, and that's it. Job done. Thank you very much. 2 episodes out the window. Mm-hmm. I have very little sound balancing to do because it's all about conversation. Whereas a situation like yours, or maybe the more traditional, setting in the closet, the sound studio with a mic and talking individually and sending it off for somebody to collect later, those kind of audio dramas, they seem a lot more straightforward logistically to manage. But it sounds like you've got quite a lot of kind of like deciding, like you say, which cut, which take, which which is the sound that you're going to have as the primary background. How do you balance against that sound? Am I making sense?
Yeah, totally. I mean, to me, that is normally in an environment in which I was making this like in a professional studio, not as an independent producer. That's where it'd be like, as a director, I would have my dialogue editor, I would have my sound designer, I would have all of these people that would take all of those things, put it all together, take it apart, pull it back together, make it sound nice, and then, and for me as an independent creator who does all of the audio production myself, it is what ends up happening, my sort of workflow is that we write it, we do all of that, we rehearse it, we perform it and record it, and then I sit down with all of that audio, and I start with my dialogue editing. So I will take all of the takes, and I actually know dialogue editors who will listen to them all on top of each other. I think that is wild, and I'm kudos to them. The show, I play a character on a show called Psycho Pompous, and Joe Palermo, who's our sound designer for that, he will literally just we'll have like 4 takes of a scene. He'll listen to them all at the same time, and at the end of it, he'll be like, it's this take for this line, and this take for this line. I'm like, how did you do that? That's not me. Listen meticulously over and over again until I decide, and then I'm also like at the same time adjusting timing of lines. One of the things that like I think about Vigil is that Vigil's pace is very fast. I think like a lot of people can listen to most shows at like 1.25 and they can still understand what's going on. Vigil's pace is too fast for that. I think you have to listen to it at 1 or it doesn't make any sense. And so, like for me, I'm like adjusting those timings while I'm doing my dialogue editing, and I'm starting to like, and what that does is it also like allows me to be like, what's missing? What do I need for ambient sound? Because I do have the ambient sounds of the world that we created, and it's like, okay, what bits do I want to add to enhance this? or is this a battle scene and I have to figure out how to make the sounds of like plants growing at super fast speeds and, you know, all of the sound design magic. So I'm already thinking about the sound design while I'm doing the dialogue editing. I finish the dialogue editing and then I go into sound design. I do passes where I'm building sound effects, building ambience, doing all those things. Once I have the full episode laid out with all of those pieces, then I go in and doing the mixing and mastering. So I'm making sure everything can be heard. I am, you know, making sure everything sounds good. Everyone, if they weren't recording in the same space, I make sure it sounds like they were, to the best of my ability, recording in the same space. I'm making sure that everything's balanced. Everything is. I'm also tracking out and doing all the panning and things and that, so that it feels real to the world and all of those things. Yeah. And so once I've done all that, then I go into the final mastering of it, and then we have an episode. Then I send it off to my cast. They listen to it and go, "Oh, you messed up all of these things." And I go, "Great, I'll go fix those things." And at the same time, they're also, because one of the things I always tell my actors is I'm like, I never want to make you sound bad. So if you're like, "I hated that take, please choose another take," or like, "Can I just re-record that line and send it to you?" That's when all of those things happen as well. And then once all of that is done, then we have a complete episode. So there is, for me, it is like the workflow is considerable to make it sound. And it's also like, you know, because I'm in the superhero landscape, like I have to compete with your Squirrel Girls and your Wolverines. Yeah. So for me, there is like a meticulous level of like workflow to make it all sound the way that it sounds in the world as you hear it on your podcatcher. But it also is like, because there's so many layers to it, it helps me compartmentalize it in my brain, where it's like I'm not spending 14 hours dialogue editing in a row until my brain melts. I spend 2 hours dialogue editing, my brain melts. Yeah. I come back 2 days later, I sound design for 2 hours. My brain melts. I take 2 days off. So that it is like a little bit less. I really am impressed by those folks who can just do the one lane of it and do it really, really well for long periods of time, because my brain doesn't have the stamina to dialogue edit for longer than 2 hours in a row.
Why do you think I don't do that? But do you, I mean, my feeling is that your music background means that you've got the ability to tell the difference in terms of the audio quality that maybe I wouldn't have that. I think train's the wrong word, but that kind of aesthetic kind of taste, if that makes sense.
I think one of the things that I am is really opinionated, and I think that like has helped me and hurt me throughout my career. But when it comes to sound, I'm really opinionated. I think you're right, because music was my primary thing growing up, and like I just have like I have this very specific ear, and it's not like, the thing is, it's like not even the best ear. Like in terms of like I don't have perfect pitch. I don't like have a particularly good ear for a musician, but I have had trained my ear my whole life. And on the flip side of the coin, what was really actually very interesting was when we were in the lockdown, I was helping a lot of theater companies pivot their like stage plays into podcasts. I worked on several musicals. I worked on all of these things. And one of the things that happened during that time was everyone was like, well, what we really need is recording engineers. We've got our audio engineers, we've got all these folks, but we need somebody who can figure out how to teach people who have never touched a piece of audio technology in their life how to record in their own space. So I was building tutorials and I was finding microphone suggestions. I was doing all of these things. And one of the things I became incredibly good at is figuring out what people's spaces looked like without ever being able to see them. So I just remember two very specific stories where one of them was I was getting a lot of early reflections in the sound, and it was making it sound very different than what the other actors were doing. And I was just like sitting there for a second thinking about it on a call with this person. I'm like, is it in front of a mirror? And he was like, how could you possibly know that? And I was like, because that's what it sounds like. And so we ended up just like putting a towel in front of the mirror and it fixed the issue. There's another time where the lead actor in one of these musicals that I was helping produce, I kept hearing the sound in her takes. And I was like, what is that sound? It's ruining all of these takes. I can't get it out of the take. And I finally was like, does your cat have a bell on her collar? And she was like, oh my God, yes. And so she had to take the collar off the cat in order to do these takes, because she's singing beautifully. and I just get these little jingles in the background, and I'm like, I can't use that. It's like a horror podcast. It can't be a jingly cat.
Oh, I love it. I have a terrible thing where I forget to turn my mail program off, and it sounds like a bird song.
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of feel like I get away with it because, like I say, no one particularly needs to worry about the kind of stuff I do. But it is one of those things where I know I should be a good boy. But the reason I mention it is, I mean, I know flipping comment, but I think it's the interesting thing is, I think if you're going to start doing this kind of thing, I think you have to understand what you are really up for doing. And I think not everybody is going to go from zero to sound engineer. But, you know, it sounds to me like the payoff is the quality bar goes up and up and up. And, you know, what do you think is the kind of payoff point? You know, for you, it sounds like you wouldn't do anything less because it wouldn't be the packaged product that you want to release. But do you think there's a payoff point where, you know, you would draw a line at?
I think what's interesting to me is that, like, each style of podcast and each podcaster has to find their, like, audio vocabulary. Yeah. I'll shout out a show that I really love that I don't know has the audience that I think it deserves. It's called Captain Hero. It's a one-person show. He does the show basically himself. He has guest stars every once in a while. But it's a silly show where he's doing all the voices himself, and he does, like, the sound effects with his voice, and he does all of these things, and it so works. And so it's like, to me, I'm building 20 layers deep, but I'm also not, you know, a Realm podcast that's doing like 400 layers deep on audio effects, right? And each person is going to develop their own vocabulary that is successful for them. And also, your first podcast might not be successful, and that's okay. Like, if I tell you that the things that I learned doing podcast and crew and doing sports radio and doing SWH and all Acadians and WAIP, like, I made so many mistakes, and not all of those shows are good. Not all of the things that I did were right or good or appropriate or culturally acceptable. And, like, looking back on those things, I learned from those things, right? And I'm still learning now. Like, 20 years from now, who knows if I'll be like, oh, that Vigil sound design was rough, you know? And I don't think I'll feel that way. But it is one of those things where it's like, your first podcast is not going to be your best podcast in all likelihood. And so, and also, like, you think about, like, I like to think, like, go back and because I like to binge podcasts, and, like, hearing the first episode of a podcast versus where it ends. I think about shows like Hello from the Magic Tavern or Wolf 359 or some of these shows where it's like, oh, that's a completely different show that I was listening to 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever it is. And so, to me, it, like, the learning is in the doing. And so, but the learning is in the doing with curiosity and with the desire to continue to deepen your craft as a storyteller. And so, like, for me, one of the things, I think this comes from my educational background, I think one of the things that makes me a good artist is that I am always learning and teaching myself things. I'm never satisfied. So, like, even though I have this workflow that I've developed for Vigil, like, in season 2, I think it's going to sound different than season 1. Not, like, drastically different, but, like, I have learned tips and tricks and like, talking to other creators and teaching myself and working on other projects where it's like, okay, I'm not the same sound designer I was before. I've learned more. I have more access to resources. I have all of those things. And the only way I have done that is by being curious and by doing it. And so I think that, like, yes, there's, like, a level of knowledge that really helps you succeed. But I think that also the things that you don't know yet will only reveal themselves when you're actually put in a position where you need that.
I mean, frankly, I'd be happy to close the podcast off at that point because, you know, you kind of nailed it. But I do want to ask one more thing, which is to get to the point where we're now releasing this and getting an audience. And I always like to ask people about the step that allowed them to find that audience. Did your audience come from the fact that you had that history? and they followed you, or did the audience come for Vigil? And was it with working with people like, Sean and Russ at the Fable and Folly that made that possible? Or, what was it for you? What was the magic formula that made this work?
I think I have always traditionally had a really hard time building audience. And I think that like the podcast audience that maybe even I had developed over the years with WAIP and the All Arcadians, I don't think a ton of them outside of like my friends and family followed me to this new endeavor. It was so different. I had traditionally been doing comedy podcasts. Now I'm doing this thriller. I don't know that there was a lot of crossover in the audience there. And I don't know that we had a ton of audience left by the time All Arcadians was over, and that's just being honest with myself.
Life. Yeah.
And so I think that we had started to build like a very small independent podcast before we joined Fable and Folly. Joining Fable and Folly taught me, not only did we get like the boost of initially like them just letting the network know we existed, but one of the big things that happened was Sean and Russ taught me, especially Russ, about how to market podcasts in ways that like make so much sense and are like the most obvious things now. But back in the day, they were the moon to me. The like feed drops and swaps and trailers, and it's like this idea of like, if you want to find your audience, go out and meet them. They are not going to find you. That idea of like, okay, that makes sense to me now. At the same time, we were submitting to festivals and we were submitting to like best of lists and reviewers and things like that. Festivals we had minimal success with. Reviewers we had minimal success with. But the thing that really sort of kicked us off, I think, we had a massive January our first year. It was because we got listed on a best of list. And I think that combined with the Fable and Folly, like the outreach and the feed drops and all of those things where we're collaborating with other creators, it's such a generous space of human beings that have all been through this process. They're like, yeah, you know what? Your show's tiny, my show's big, but of course we'll put you in our feed and share your work with our audience. Of course we will. You don't even have to like do anything for us in a lot of cases, or like just put us in your feed. We don't care, if people really, we might get a couple listeners and that's great. There's so much generosity and sharing in this community. And the combination of those things and then getting listed on some of these lists, I think help people find us in multiple ways. And that's not me saying that like festivals aren't a great way to get noticed, or that some of these other like reviews and things like that aren't great ways to get noticed. Those were not particularly successful for me in this experience. But I think that like any way you can find, I mean, we do a ton of social media stuff and I'm not totally sure how successful it is. I love doing it because one of the things that we've really tried to do is be really immersive in what we're doing. And so like I'm telling story with our social media posts. I'm telling story with our newsletters. Like we have exclusive story in our newsletter for people who really want to read that. And so like to me it's like I enjoy that element of it, making it meeting audience where they are. But I think like the most successful things with us was collaborating with other podcasts and just sharing and finding podcasts that we thought there was going to be a lot of crossover audience that liked us. And then also like getting on lists for like, I think we were like one of the best sci-fi podcasts of like 2022 or whatever. I don't know that we were, but like that was one of the lists that we got listed on.
You got on the list. That's what you were.
Yeah. Right. And then like best thrillers. Like those were the two lists that like we got onto, and then all of a sudden people were like, oh, I'll put that. And that's one of the great ways that people find podcasts, right? They're either you hear it on a show you're listening to, or you're online like, what are the best superhero podcasts? And we've been very lucky that like our fans have given us some word of mouth support. I mean, Reddit hates everything, but I've only ever seen lovely things about Vigil on Reddit. Now somebody's going to go on there and just absolutely troll us. But
in games, a lot of games live or die by their Reddit community.
Yeah. And it's nice to like, I mean, as somebody who was in the Lord of the Rings musical, which got absolutely eviscerated on Reddit, to my glee, I thought I liked being in it. I like the show. To be clear, I had a great time doing it, but the internet hated it, and I thought that was so funny. but and I don't take reviews to heart. Like I read them for the joy of it all. But the idea that like going on Reddit and seeing that people will, you know, when somebody's looking for a superhero podcast, that people will be like, I really liked Vigil. And like one of the nicest compliments I ever got was somebody on Reddit being like, I actually hate superhero stuff, but I liked Vigil. And I was like, that's maybe the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my work, you know?
Chef's kiss. Yeah, love it. That's what you're after. At the end of the day, that's what you're after. You want to leave an audience with something that they feel positive about, they're willing to share. I mean, frankly, you know, I'm less worried about audience numbers for what I'm doing. For me, it's a process of like self-care to be able to create something and to play it through with fantastic people. If I happen to get an audience for it, fantastic. But it sounds like you've done an amazing job getting kind of Vigil together, and it sounds like the crew that you've done that with have gone on and managed to do amazing things and still keep playing along with you, which is even better.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I did for myself, a big favor that I did for myself, and that I really like is it's so interesting because I feel like theater is such a different world where you're building the thing and advertising the thing and performing the thing, and it's all happening at the same time. Yeah. And one of the adjustments that I made, and my first podcast, I made the same mistake. I was doing a live show once a month. We were writing 80 pages a month to do a live show. We were recording 2 episodes back to back, and then I would edit that, and then we would release. And it was like, it was brutal. And then I was also like trying to find time to promote it. Absolutely not. Like it wasn't happening. And when we made Vigil, I told myself, I was like, I'm gonna record every episode is gonna be done before I even think about like putting it out there. And what I did unconsciously was I fell into what film and TV does, which is they have a pre-production phase, they have a production phase, and they have a post-production phase and a distribution phase.
Yes.
And that having a distribution and post-production phase was game-changing for me because I had the space to sit down and be like, great, how am I going to promote this? How am I going to find an audience? How am I going to distribute it in a way that I can, like, because I make the shows, like you said, for the joy of it, because I'm a creative, because I want to find ways to tell stories. But at the same time, I want, if these stories are going to be helpful to someone, especially for me making a show that was an all BIPOC cast, all BIPOC creatives, like a whole team, we had a mission behind what we were doing.
Yeah.
Like, I want to see if there's people out there that can be positively affected by what I'm doing. I would like to find them. Absolutely. And so in that sense, giving myself the space to just focus on that was massive. And also I had help. I have Leila Sahir, who's one of our actors on the show, has a marketing mind, and she was very involved with like, we should do this, we need to do that, we need to do that. And I'm like, thank you, yes please, let's go.
Take the help.
But yeah. But it was really having the time and space to focus on that, where it's like, it's hard to, when you're in production, right? I'm focused on writing scripts or acting or directing or editing. I don't have space to put my brain on, well, which shows can I listen to that are going to be great feed swaps, or how can I strategize, get it cornering the superhero marketplace on like whatever, or collecting like all of these things, or posting and reading reviews and going out and submitting to festivals. Like, these are things that require time and space to do successfully, just like any other part of the process. Yeah. So one of the biggest favors that I think that if I can talk to producers, give yourself that time and space. You don't always have to have an episode coming out. You can focus on the episode you already have coming out.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. And I feel that pain because I have a day job and I'm in the middle of a fundraise and all that kind of tech stuff. So yeah, I have no bandwidth. So I totally feel that pain. Although allegedly I'm supposed to be marketing trained, whatever that means. It doesn't. It's a very different world, marketing podcast, it turns out, than the stuff I'm used to.
It is. And it's interesting too, because like, to me, the more that I've done like the podcast marketing side of it, the more that I find that that's more intuitive to how my brain thinks about marketing than I used to do like theatrical marketing, things like that, and just like here and there. Because when you work in theater, you do every job for a little while because somebody will ask it of you. And so it's just so interesting to see that like, oh, I just talked to somebody who makes a show that is similar to mine, and we play our shows for each other, and the audience decides if they like it or not, that makes sense to my brain.
Go figure. No, this is what I loved, and this is one of the joys that why I started doing this podcast is specifically because I'm just enjoying chatting to other creators about their process. With that in mind, we should call it to a close because I although as much as I can continue talking to you for hours, I'm sure that there's only a certain amount of threshold we'll have an audience listening to us. What's that one thing, what one piece of advice you would give to somebody wanting to start making a podcast or an audio drama right now?
I think, and this is something I said earlier in the podcast, and I can't remember who told me it. It's a great piece of wisdom: is don't hold on to your good idea because you think you won't have another one.
Yeah,
I think it's just so important to just, and that leads right into the learn by doing and all of those things. It's like you're never ready and you're always ready. So just go ahead.
Yeah, do or do not. There is no try.
Give yourself permission. I think that's the biggest thing. Is give yourself permission, and you don't need to be. I know that this is like 8 things, but it's all sort of one thing. Yeah. It's like the wherever you're at right now is good enough. And I will listen. I listen to podcasts all the time where I'm like, I wouldn't have made this the same way, or like this isn't my taste, or this isn't up to my level of like opinionated listening. But I think it's also valuable to be out there, and I think there's an audience for all of it as long as you can find it. So my one piece of advice is give yourself permission. Go do it.
On that note, thank you very much, Adam. That's been fantastic. Give yourself permission, I think, is a fantastic way to leave this. At the end of the day, if you are trying to make great stories or great dramas, this is a fantastic medium, and the only way we learn is by doing. So let's get out there and do it. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe. Please go and check out Vigil Pod, vigilpod.com. Actually, Adam, if people want to get hold of you, find out more information about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, you can check out vigilpod.com. There's a contact form on there. If you want the direct email, it's contact@vigilpod.com. You can also find out more about me and the stuff that I am doing at adamquutaishat.com. If you don't know how to spell my last name, good luck. But you can also follow me on Instagram as well. I'm there and sharing things. So, and I'll spell my name really quickly. QUTAISHAT, and it's Adam, QUTAISHAT.com is where all my stuff is at.
And we'll put all that in the show notes. On that note, thank you very much. And hopefully we'll be back next time when we'll be talking more about how to make audio stories and actual plays. Goodbye.